You're doing everything right, but something invisible is blocking your life. If you pray, if you fast, if you're faithful, if you're obedient, if you serve, if you give, if you worship, and your life still won't move forward, that's not normal. That's not how God's kingdom is supposed to work. Faithfulness should produce fruit. Obedience should open doors. Prayer should bring breakthrough. But for many believers, none of that is happening. And the worst part isn't the problem itself. The worst part is the silent guilt, the constant questioning, the feeling that maybe, somehow, the problem is you. Maybe you're not praying right. Maybe you're not believing hard enough. Maybe there's sin you haven't confessed. Maybe you're not spiritual enough. Maybe God is disappointed in you. And that internal torment, that self-blame, that crushing weight of feeling like you're failing spiritually when you're doing everything you know to do, that becomes its own prison. Today, someone who has seen how the spiritual realm operates from the other side is going to explain something that's almost never taught in churches. Something that keeps people spiritually stuck for years, even decades, while they're faithfully serving God. Something invisible that blocks advancement even when your heart is right and your actions are correct. And understanding this one thing could be the reason your life finally starts moving forward after years of stagnation. If this kind of content helps you see what no one talks about, subscribe now. Because this channel exists to reveal what stays hidden. Let me describe something and tell me if this is you. You see people less faithful than you prospering. People who don't pray as much. People who don't serve as consistently. People who aren't as committed. People who barely go to church. And somehow their businesses are growing. Their relationships are healthy. Their finances are increasing. Their lives are advancing. While you, faithful you, obedient you, serving you, giving you, praying you, are stuck in the same place you were 5 years ago. Same struggles, same limitations, same closed doors, same unanswered prayers. Or maybe you pray and nothing moves. You bring the same requests to God year after year. You fast about them. You believe for them. You stand in faith. You declare scripture over them. You have people pray with you about them. And nothing changes. The prayer goes up, but nothing comes down. The faith is real, but the breakthrough never arrives. The waiting continues, but the answer never comes. And you start to wonder if God even hears you, if your prayers are reaching heaven. If something is wrong with you spiritually, that's blocking your connection to God. Or maybe you feel like you're always starting from zero. Every time you gain momentum, something happens that knocks you back to the beginning. You build something and it falls apart. You make progress and something destroys it. You move forward 3 steps and get pushed back 5 steps. And this pattern repeats so consistently that you start to believe this is just how your life is going to be. That advancement isn't for you. That breakthrough is for other people, but not for you. That you're destined to struggle while watching others succeed. And here's what this creates: a dangerous internal conflict. Faith on the outside, confusion on the inside. You're praising God publicly while privately wondering why nothing works for you. You're encouraging others while secretly discouraged about your own situation. You're declaring victory while internally feeling defeated. You maintain the appearance of faith because that's what you're supposed to do. But inside there's doubt, there's frustration, there's exhaustion. There's the quiet question you're afraid to ask out loud. Does God even care about my situation? And it's exactly there, in that place of internal conflict, where many believers fall into an invisible error. An error they don't see, an error no one taught them to recognize, an error that isn't about their heart or their faith or their obedience, but an error that gives the enemy legal permission to block what God wants to release. If this is already making sense, subscribe. The next few minutes are going to change how you understand your spiritual walk. Now let me establish why I can speak about this with authority. I spent years in Satanism before I encountered Christ. I'm not going to glorify that past or give it more attention than necessary, but I will tell you what that experience taught me. When you've seen how the enemy system operates from the inside, when you've understood the mechanics of spiritual warfare from the opposing side, you recognize patterns that most Christians never see. You understand strategies that most churches never teach about. And one of the most important things I learned is this: not every blockage is an attack. Some blockages are permissions that haven't been discerned. The enemy doesn't just attack randomly. He operates according to law, according to permission, according to access. And when he has legal grounds to block, he doesn't need to attack. He just needs to maintain the block. And most believers never identify this because they've been taught to recognize attacks, but not to recognize permissions. They know how to resist the devil, but they don't know how to close the doors that give the devil the right to stay. Here's what I need you to understand clearly. The problem keeping your life stuck isn't lack of faith. It's not that you're not believing hard enough. It's not that you're not praying enough. It's not that God is withholding blessing because you're not spiritual enough. And it's also not hidden sin. Yes, unconfessed sin can block blessing. But most believers who are stuck aren't living in hidden rebellion. They're genuinely seeking God. They're genuinely trying to live right. They're genuinely faithful. So if it's not lack of faith and it's not hidden sin, what is it? It's something structural, not emotional. Most teaching about breakthrough focuses on emotions, on feeling more faith, on believing harder, on praying with more passion, on generating more spiritual intensity. But structure isn't about emotion. Structure is about how things are set up, about what doors are open, about what permissions exist, about what patterns are active. And when there's a structural issue in the spiritual realm, emotional intensity doesn't fix it. You can pray with all the passion in the world, but if there's a door open that you don't know about, if there's a permission active that you haven't identified, if there's a pattern repeating that you haven't recognized, the block remains. If you want to keep learning this kind of discernment, subscribe now. This isn't common content. Let me introduce you to the concept that almost no one teaches. And I'm going to do this progressively, because if I explain everything at once, you won't retain it. The spiritual realm operates according to principles, to laws, to patterns. And one of those patterns is cycles. Spiritual cycles that repeat until they're completed correctly. And here's what most believers don't understand. You can be obedient to God while maintaining something active that He never authorized. You can be faithful in 90% of your life while the 10% that's not surrendered creates a legal opening. You can be praying powerfully while a door you don't know about remains open, giving the enemy access. Let me break this down into 3 components that work together to create what I'm calling structural blockage. First, unrecognized cycles. These are patterns that repeat in your life that you've never identified as spiritual. Maybe every time you're about to break through financially, something happens that drains your resources, an emergency, an unexpected expense, a crisis that requires money you were about to use for advancement. And this happens so consistently that it can't be coincidence. But you've never recognized it as a spiritual pattern. You've just accepted it as bad luck, as life being hard, as the way things are for you. Or maybe every time you get close to someone, every time a relationship starts deepening, something happens that destroys it. Misunderstanding, conflict, betrayal, distance. And the pattern repeats relationship after relationship. But you've never seen it as a spiritual cycle. You've just blamed yourself, thought you're bad at relationships, thought you choose the wrong people. But you've never asked, is there a spiritual pattern here that needs to be broken? Or maybe every time you step toward your calling, every time you try to move into what God showed you, obstacles appear, the door closes, the provision doesn't come, the opportunity falls through, and you've interpreted this as God saying no or God saying not yet. But you've never considered, what if this is a cycle that repeats because I haven't learned how to break it? Second component, doors opened unconsciously. This is huge, and most believers have no awareness of it. Doors are access points in the spiritual realm. They're permissions, they're legal grounds, and they can be opened through words, through agreements, through objects, through relationships, through places, through media, through activities. And once a door is open, it doesn't close automatically just because you got saved. It doesn't close automatically just because you're living right now. It has to be identified and closed intentionally. Let me give you examples. Words you've spoken over yourself, curses, agreements with lies. I'll never succeed. Nothing good ever happens to me. I always fail. I'm never going to get married. I'm cursed. My family is cursed. These aren't just negative thoughts. These are words. And words are spiritual. They open doors. They create permissions. They establish agreements. And even though you're saved now, even though you're praying now, if those words were never renounced, if those agreements were never broken, the door remains open. Or objects in your house, things you brought from places you shouldn't have been. Things given to you by people involved in occult practices. Things you bought that have spiritual significance you didn't recognize. Statues, jewelry, art, books, music, these can be doors. Not because the object itself has power, but because of what it represents spiritually, what it was dedicated to, what it was used for. And if it's in your house, it can be a legal access point. Or relationships you've never fully broken spiritually. Sexual relationships create soul ties. And those ties don't dissolve just because the relationship ended. They remain until they're severed spiritually. And through that tie, there can be access. Through that tie, there can be influence. Through that tie, there can be blockage. Or relationships with people who are operating in witchcraft or divination or occult practices. Even if you're not participating, if you're in close relationship with someone who is, that creates potential for transference, for spiritual contamination, for open doors. Third component, areas not surrendered. This is the most subtle and the most common. Most believers have areas of their lives they've never consciously, specifically, intentionally given to God. Not because they're rebellious, but because they didn't know those areas needed to be surrendered. Your finances, your sexuality, your past, your future, your ambitions, your relationships, your entertainment, your thoughts. And wherever you're still in control instead of God, that area is not covered by divine protection. That area is vulnerable. That area can be a legal opening. Now here's how these three work together to create structural blockage. You have an unrecognized cycle that keeps repeating. You have doors open that you don't know about. And you have areas of your life not fully surrendered to God. And together, these create a structure in the spiritual realm that blocks advancement. Not because God isn't willing to bless you, but because there's legal permission for the enemy to restrict. And until you identify the cycle, close the doors, and surrender the areas, the block remains. Not because you're not praying, but because you're praying against attack when the issue is permission. Let me show you this from Scripture so you know this isn't just my perspective. Let me give you 3 examples that demonstrate different aspects of what I'm describing. First, Daniel chapter 10. Daniel was praying, he was fasting, he was seeking God for 21 days, and nothing happened. No answer, no breakthrough, no response, and Daniel could have thought, God isn't hearing me. I'm not spiritual enough, I'm doing something wrong. But on the 21st day, an angel appeared and told him something crucial. Your prayer was heard from the first day, Daniel, but the prince of Persia resisted me for 21 days. Think about that. Daniel was faithful. Daniel was praying correctly. Daniel was doing everything right. But there was spiritual warfare happening that he couldn't see. Invisible resistance. An angel fighting a demonic prince. A battle in the heavenly realm that was blocking the answer Daniel was praying for on earth. And Daniel had no idea this was happening. He just knew his prayers weren't being answered. And if the angel hadn't told him, he never would have known why. This teaches something critical. You can be doing everything right and still experience blockage because there's warfare happening in a realm you can't see. Warfare that's not about your faith or your obedience. Warfare that's strategic. Warfare that's positional. Warfare over territory and timing and purpose. And if you don't understand this, you'll blame yourself for delays that aren't your fault. You'll think God isn't answering when God sent the answer, and it's being contested in transit. Second example, Joseph, Genesis 37 through 50. God gave Joseph a dream when he was 17, a promise, a vision of his future, that he would lead, that he would rule, that even his family would bow to him. And Joseph believed that promise, but then everything went wrong. His brothers betrayed him, sold him into slavery. He ended up in Egypt, became a servant in Potiphar's house, was falsely accused, thrown into prison, and sat there for years, forgotten, delayed, with a promise that seemed impossible. And Joseph could have thought, I heard God wrong. The dream wasn't real. God changed his mind. I'm disqualified. But Joseph didn't give up. He stayed faithful in the prison. He served even when it seemed pointless. He maintained his integrity even when no one was watching. And eventually, at age 30, 13 years after the dream, the promise came true. Not because Joseph did something that finally earned it, but because the timing was right, because the process was complete, because the preparation was finished. This teaches something crucial. Promise doesn't mean immediate advancement. God showing you your future doesn't mean you're going there tomorrow. There are cycles between promise and fulfillment, processes that have to be completed, preparation that has to happen, character that has to be developed. And if you don't understand this, you'll think delay means denial. You'll think waiting means God lied. You'll think process means you failed. But delay isn't denial. Waiting isn't rejection. Process isn't punishment. Sometimes you're not blocked. You're being prepared. Third example, Israel in the wilderness. Numbers 14. God delivered them from Egypt, brought them to the edge of the promised land, told them to go in and possess it. But they sent spies first, and the spies came back with a bad report. The land is good, but the people are giants. The cities are fortified. We can't take it. We look like grasshoppers compared to them. And the people believed the bad report instead of God's promise. They complained. They wanted to go back to Egypt. They refused to move forward. And because of that decision, because of that unbelief, God said, "You'll wander in the wilderness for 40 years. 1 year for each day the spies were in the land." An 11-day journey became a 40-year cycle. An entire generation died in the wilderness. Not because God didn't want to give them the land, but because they wouldn't take it. Not because the promise wasn't real, but because they refused to walk into it. This teaches something sobering. Cycles can extend when you don't learn the lesson. What should take days can take decades. Not because God is punishing you, but because you keep repeating the same pattern. You keep making the same choice. You keep believing the same lie. You keep operating from the same fear. And until you break the pattern, the cycle continues. You keep going around the same mountain. You keep facing the same test. You keep hitting the same wall. Not because God is withholding breakthrough, but because you haven't moved past what's keeping you in the cycle. Now let me bring this directly to you. Let me help you identify if this is what's happening in your life. I want you to ask yourself some questions, and I want you to answer them honestly. Not what you wish was true, but what is actually true. What keeps repeating in your life? What pattern shows up again and again? What situation do you keep finding yourself in no matter how many times you try to change it? Is it financial crisis right when you're about to get ahead? Is it relationship breakdown right when things are getting serious? Is it opportunity disappearing right when you're about to step into something new? Is it sickness or emergency right when you're about to break through? Where do you always get stuck? What area of your life has been the same for years no matter what you do? Is it finances that never increase? Is it relationships that never work? Is it a calling that never activates? Is it health that never improves? Is it a situation that never resolves? What never changes no matter how much you pray about it? What have you been bringing to God for years with no shift? What have you fasted about, believed about, stood in faith about, declared over, had people pray with you about, and it's still exactly the same? And here's what I need you to understand. If the same thing keeps happening, if the same area stays stuck, if the same prayer goes unanswered year after year, that's not normal. That's not just God's timing. That's not just a test of your faith. That could be a structural blockage that you haven't identified, a cycle you haven't recognized, a door you haven't closed, an area you haven't surrendered. And until you discern what it is and address it specifically, it will stay exactly the same. If you feel like God is speaking to you right now, subscribe. This helps the channel and reaches more people in this exact season. Now let me tell you what changes everything. But I'm not going to give you 3 easy steps. I'm not going to hand you a formula. Because formulas don't work for structural issues. Formulas are for simple problems. This isn't simple. This is discernment. This is spiritual intelligence. This is learning to see what's invisible and address what's been ignored. Here's the truth most people don't want to hear. Discernment comes before action. You can't fix what you can't see. You can't close a door you don't know is open. You can't break a cycle you haven't recognized. You can't surrender an area you don't realize you're controlling. So the first step isn't doing something. The first step is seeing. Asking God to show you what you've been missing. Asking the Holy Spirit to reveal what's been hidden. Asking for discernment to identify the cycle, the door, the unsurrendered area. And here's the part that makes people uncomfortable. God doesn't break cycles you haven't recognized. He doesn't close doors you haven't asked him to close. He doesn't take control of areas you haven't surrendered. Not because he's powerless, but because he gave you authority. The authority to open and close, to bind and loose, to permit and forbid, and he waits for you to use that authority. He waits for you to see the issue, to identify it, to address it, to close what needs closing, to break what needs breaking, to surrender what needs surrendering. This is why some people stay blocked for decades, not because God is withholding breakthrough, but because they never identified what was blocking it. They kept praying general prayers. God, bless me. God, help me. God, give me breakthrough. But they never prayed specifically about the cycle, or the door, or the area. They never asked God to reveal what they couldn't see. They never asked for discernment to identify the structure that was blocking them. They just kept praying for breakthrough while the blockage remained untouched. And this is where I want to hear from you, because the algorithm rewards engagement, because your comment helps this video reach more people who need it, because your testimony could be what helps someone else identify their own blockage. I want you to go to the comments right now and answer one question. Where do you feel your life is stuck? Not a long explanation, not your whole story, just one word, one area. Finances, relationships, health, calling, career, family, ministry. Whatever it is, just comment that one word. Where you feel stuck, where nothing moves no matter what you do, where you've been praying for years with no change. And here's what I want you to know before you go. You're not behind, you're not disqualified, you're not forgotten, you're not cursed, you're not broken. You might just be at the exact point where revelation begins, where discernment starts opening your eyes, where you're about to see what's been invisible, where you're about to identify what's been blocking you, where you're about to close the door that's been open, where you're about to break the cycle that's been repeating, where you're about to surrender the area that's been vulnerable. And once you see it, once you identify it, once you discern what's been hidden, you have authority to address it, to speak to the door and command it closed, to speak to the cycle and declare it broken, to speak to the area and surrender it fully to God. Not because you're more spiritual now, but because you can't fight what you can't see, and now you see. Now you know. Now you understand. And that understanding is the beginning of breakthrough. Subscribe now if this content made sense, because the next videos go deeper into how to identify specific doors, how to break specific cycles, how to surrender specific areas. This isn't just one conversation. This is a journey of discernment, of learning to see the spiritual realm clearly, of understanding how the enemy operates so you can close the access points he's using, of building spiritual intelligence that most believers never develop because no one teaches them. Go comment right now, one word, where you're stuck, and then watch what God starts revealing. Because sometimes the breakthrough begins the moment you're willing to acknowledge where you're actually blocked. The moment you stop pretending everything is fine and admit where you need help. The moment you say out loud what you've been carrying silently. That's when revelation comes. That's when discernment activates. That's when God starts showing you what you've been missing. Comment now, subscribe, and get ready for the next level of spiritual understanding that's about